Since ancient times, many lines of philosophical thought defend the illusory character of the reality in which we would be inserted. This is the case with Buddhism and some other Eastern philosophies. As there is insufficient material evidence, although these doctrines are considered attractive, they would not be scientific. A closer look, however, relates to Johannes Kepler's scientific work and his laws of planetary motion. He was the first to question the circular and uniform movement as the product of an illusion disguised as reality. As is the case today, when Kepler's generation looked at the night sky, they always saw the same picture. Planets and stars move from east to west with constant speed and acceleration. However, Kepler noted that Mars behaved in a particular way, retreating at some points in its orbit. After much effort, he realized that the only explanation for the phenomenon would be the elliptical orbit. As Mars would be farther from the Sun than Earth, there would be a moment when it would be overtaken by a planet whose orbital speed would be greater. This would result in the true loopings performed by Mars in the night sky and would cause circular motion to be ostracized. The warning given to us by Kepler regarding the illusory nature of circular motion seems not to have been taken very seriously by the scientific community, which preferred to stick to the beauty of Kepler's laws for planetary motion, disregarding abstractions about the nature of reality. Therefore, some questions remain unanswered, such as the conservation of the mass and volume of our star over time. It suggests that the curvature of space, related to solar maths, should be constant over time. Thus, it becomes difficult to explain how the same curvature in space could simultaneously govern the orbits of planets with totally different physical characteristics. On the other hand, the conservation of the star's brightness over time would suggest that the energy emitted by the Sun should gradually dissipate with increasing distances. Thus, there should not be enough heat in the position of the outermost planets, such as Jupiter and Saturn, to justify the existence of volcanic activity and winds above 1,000 kilometers per hour. The albedo of Jupiter and Saturn is also higher than expected. That is, they reflect up to 3 times more light into space than that received directly from the Sun. These are real data obtained by the Voyager missions. It seems that the laws of physics, regardless of their accuracy, would result from our adaptation to the reality of the matrix, or to everything that we see outside. For this reason, Newton is more appreciated than Einstein, because his laws are perfectly adapted to our daily lives. To try to escape from this matrix illusion, science would need to review the role of the observer in decoding information derived from the primary reality. I will give a classic example. As the apparent movement of the Earth passed on to the Sun by the observer is circular and uniform, the time spent by the light to cover the distance that separates us from the star is always the same. That is, 8 minutes. In this type of movement, the speed and acceleration of the planet would be constant, always keeping the same distance from the Sun. Cutting a circle in half, the Earth would take 6 months to cover the area corresponding to each one of the semicircles formed. If the real orbit is the elliptical, as we know, it would be hidden by the matrix. Kepler's second law for the planets tells us that they cover equal areas of the ellipse at equal times. This explains the different speeds assumed by the planets at certain points in the elliptical orbit. in order to keep the observer prisoner from his own points of view, as, in practice, the space would need to be isolated in the process. That is, a messenger would be created, who would assume the task of speaking through space. Then, a virtual fusion between the two would occur, in such a way that even if the space curved, it remained virtually two-dimensional. It is evident that the messenger mentioned would be well represented by all forms of electromagnetic radiation. This is because the necessary packaging of the light, or its quantization, would be able to simulate a curvature in space and, in doing so, suppress the registration of any interval of time that was necessary to complete the process. It is said that, during its packaging, the light would be virtually level at its extremes of maximum and minimum energy, which would refer to the circular and uniform movement. In the case of a distant star, its light would travel through the void of space in the form of concentric circular waves, suggesting that the source would behave as if it were a center which emits light into space. It is not known exactly what happens to the light on the way from the position of the star to where we are, or until the light emitted by a star reaches to Earth. There is a direct access principle of exclusion to what happens in our future. For the star to be seen, the light it senses must have already reached Earth. Before that, the star does not exist, even though it is there. When the light spreads in our position, we already find ourselves looking in the direction of our own past. At this point, we would already be trapped inside the matrix, and we couldn't get out of it to see if there's anything outside. The arrow of time inverts its direction, and our luminous messenger exposes, instantly, the information that it would have carried across the immense distances that separate us from the source, regardless of its limited speed. The absence of measurable time in our future would justify the idea that, in reality, time would be the foundation of the matrix illusion. It is that this form of suppression of time, by the packaging of light, seems to move its ground zero to the position of the observer. That is, if you suppress the time the light shifts, or you cannot be aware of anything that happens before it spreads, the restraint of time will tell you that the future and the present are actually one. The future would result from the paradox that we can only look with delay at the reality that would exist outside the matrix. Our dependence on the constant presence of information expressed in our memory would have subjected the observer to forced exile in the past of the universe. Even so, we are left with the illusion that we would still be living in the present, and that the distant stars would be seen with what they looked like in the past. When it comes to our point of view, the reality of the matrix would be replaced in the primary reality. As this discussion can be very long and deserves counterpoints, we will address some influences that this form of late evaluation of events would have on the orientation of some forces which would act within the matrix. Some astronomer chains compare the behavior of space with that of an elastic band. As this type of behavior also occurs with light, when executing its harmonic movement, the mass spring set can be used to represent the direction of some forces, which would involve space in their performance. It is said that in space-time the potential energy, which would normally increase in the first phase of the harmonic movement, that of stretching the spring, would be zero at infinity. In this condition, the spring would be in its resting position, neither stretched nor contracted. This means that there would be no spring stretching phase within space-time, at least if it could be directly measured or evaluated. Potential gravitational energy would always be negative at finite distances, and would decrease as the distance between two attracting bodies narrows. That is, the potential energy decreases when the space spring, previously at rest, enters its contraction phase. Inflationary models, however, suggest that there would be a stretch phase of the space spring, even if it did not occur in real time. This is due to the immense distances that the galaxies are placed, and whose light would need time, which can be in the order of up to a few billion years, to reach us on Earth. In these inflationary models, what is in clear disagreement with reality would be the statement that the galaxies would move away from each other as quickly as the more distant they were from each other. As the light is used as a support to make this statement, this contradicts what was predicted in the spring stretching phase of the space in the mass spring set, which should be accompanied by an increase in the elastic potential energy. For the inflationary model to be sustained, it would be necessary to abandon the rubber band analogy.